You're listening to Pretty Much Pop, a culture podcast, cast not for our fame, but for the quality of our voices. Today we're discussing the 124-year-old phenomena that is The Wizard of Oz in light of the recent release of the film version of the first half of the stage musical Wicked. I'm Mark Linsenmeyer, and thanks to the Oz books, I thought that East was on the left side of maps for too many years.
I'm Al Baker, and I'm just here to festivate my manifestorious gratitutions.
I'm Sarahlyn Bruck, and with a title like Wicked, I was disappointed the movie wasn't about Boston.
My name is Lawrence Ware, and I am easing on down the road. Did you guys get that reference?
Oh, of course.
Of course.
Not even a little bit.
I'll say The Wiz is one of the things that I did not revisit. I don't remember having a super positive experience about it.
You don't need to.
But I see that it was back on Broadway, or is coming back on Broadway. Anyway, it is still alive.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely a lot. The movie itself is not very good. The musical numbers are delightful.
The musical numbers are great. I watched some clips of The Wiz, and it was kind of painful.
Not a good movie.
One thing you do have to hand The Wiz to is I was casting about for things that I could praise Wicked for as a show and as a concept, and almost anything that I thought, oh, maybe we can say that Wicked was the first to do this or that. The Wiz almost by definition got there first, so maybe it was a little bit undercooked, but you got to hand it to him.
People's histories with this franchise. I'll start because this was the first thing in terms of longer books, that were still children's books that my parents would read to me. We owned the whole set of L. Frank Baum's Oz books. The 14 or whatever. I should have that number at the top of my head. But
it is 14 that he did.
Yeah, okay. And they sort of sloped off. So I read them to my kids, but we sort of stopped around number 9. He got less interested in it as he went on.
Wow, you're a trooper.
Yeah, but and I think The Wizard of Oz was like one of my first movie memories that we saw that probably even before we read any of these books. I'd had the Gregory Maguire novel sitting in my house and had not read it. I didn't quite finish his 4th book, but I just as audiobooks, I really enjoyed, there's sort of diminishing returns, but definitely a good writer, and the concept of Wicked itself. And of course, the musical was great, and we can talk about what we thought of this film, but I was very pleasantly surprised.
Super interesting to hear that you read the books as a child, because I didn't even know that there were, but The Wizard of Oz was just a movie to me when I was a kid. But it was one of the half dozen VHS tapes that my grandparents had in their cabinet. So along with West Side Story and the Watership Down cartoon, for some reason, I watched The Wizard of Oz countless dozens of times on their tiny little 4x3 TV.
Good taste.
Yeah, very, very good taste, especially in movie musicals. But I think this was the first time that, because I rewatched The Wizard of Oz for this, and I think it was the first time I'd seen it in HD. And God, the Munchkin costumes are terrifying.
I think I started off with the movie first. In fact, we taped it off of the television. And so I even remember kind of where all the commercial breaks go in.
VHS. Wow.
My parents didn't push the books or anything like that on me. I went and discovered those on my own. I read, I think, a bunch, maybe 4 or 5 as a kid. And just this past week, I read the first one again. And I was surprised at how much I remembered of that book. Because as a kid, I remember how the story was parallel. For the most part, it was parallel to the Wizard of Oz movie. But it just felt like Dorothy in the movie had so much more agency than she did in the books. It just felt like the book does what I tell my writing students not to do, which is this happens and then that happens and then this happens, and it's like there's no sense of real action on the main characters' parts. But that's my history with Wizard of Oz. And then I also saw Wicked in the theater when it came around to Philly many years ago. We went and saw that. But that's my history up until now.
So not the musical live on stage, a musical flowing to your movie screen.
No, we saw Wicked on stage many years ago when it came to Philly, to the traveling show.
Yes. I saw that with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Did you like that musical?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
I loved it.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I loved it. In fact, I wish that I had brought my daughter. My husband loves musicals, and so we went, and we both were just absolutely gaga over it. And then we came back home, and Virginia must have been, 10 or 11 or something, which I thought was the sweet spot for this musical. And she was like, nah, I'm good. I don't need to see it.
Damn.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of dark. I have a interesting relationship with this. So I know the original Wizard of Oz movie very, very well. My mother showed it to me many, many times. I think it was a Christmas thing for us. We used to watch it every Christmas. I had no conception of the books whatsoever, really, until Mark told me to look at them. Like, I had a vague idea, but had not read them. I went through and I read, I want to say 5 of them.
Oh, wow.
Off of your recommendation.
Whoa.
Because they were very easily digestible. They're not very hard to read at all. You know, so I was able to kind of zoom through them on my free time. Now, the book Wicked by Gregory, help me, Sarah? Maguire. I read that when it first came out. I remember that. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I liked it so much, I shared it with friends of mine and told them, oh, guys, you got to read this. Now, I've never saw the musical. I heard the musical was a big thing, but I was always dubious of the musical's ability to capture what I thought was special about the book. Apparently it did. You guys liked it. But I was always dubious about that. And I remain dubious, honestly, having seen the film. We can talk about that here in a little bit. But nevertheless, I never read the sequels that, Mark, you've read of the book Wicked, because I just felt that Wicked was such a beautiful, nice little book. I didn't want anything more. I was happy with what I got. I guess maybe there's more there, but I was happy with what I got. So I didn't have a large relationship with The Wizard of Oz, but I will say I have a huge relationship with The Wiz. Because The Wiz was something that every single time I hooked up with my family down in small rural Oklahoma, a little small town called Harris, a black founded town there just outside of Idabel. Every time we got together for Thanksgiving, for Mother's Day, for Christmas, I was forced to watch The Wiz. Had no choice, right? It was because Michael Jackson was in the film. Diana Ross was in the film. Al, you're not hearing me, sir. I was forced. They said, you gonna sit there and you gonna watch this damn movie. They made me watch that movie. Now, the musical numbers, I know each of the musical numbers inside and out. The monkey scene still terrifies me to this day, but that was the most boring movie I had ever seen in my life and have ever seen in my life. It's like tedious and boring, populated with great songs and dance. But I have not revisited that film. I will not revisit that film. I refuse to watch that film because I've probably seen it somewhere in the area of 50 times and I'm never going to watch the movie again. But I do watch the dance numbers every now and then. But nevertheless, so I have a relationship with this franchise. I think that the lasting power of the franchise is interesting. The Wizard of Oz is so indelible. Wicked is very interesting. The musical, The Wiz, like it's amazing that the influence that one little book had upon the culture and continues to have upon the culture. Very fascinated by it.
Lawrence, would you see The Wiz on Broadway if you had the chance?
No. No. I'm trying to tell you, I was tortured with this film.
You've had enough.
I don't want nothing else to do with it.
I bet they improved the dialogue. I bet it's not just the film exactly.
I'm sure they did. I do not want nothing to do with The Wiz. I am done. Thank you.
Right. So I really like with musicals that they keep reworking them, that they test it and they with a film, generally you don't get the chance to do that. It's just out there. If it was a flop, it was a flop. But if this, if it's a flop, it's canceled. So like you better add another song. You better add something better. You better trim this down. And so the decision with, what do we think of the movie? I mean, I was so impressed with just about every aspect of it. But it seemed like, Al, you in particular seemed like you were very cynical coming into this.
I was, and I have to eat my words in a big way. So I love musicals, but I deliberately never listened to Wicked, other than obviously everyone's heard Defying Gravity. But I try to expose myself as little as possible to musicals that I hope to one day see on stage. Obviously, I've missed a chance now with Wicked because I watched the movie. But yeah, I wasn't terribly optimistic about it because, like, frankly, I didn't think Ariana Grande would be great casting. I wasn't sure that she'd have the chops for this kind of role. I thought, it's just another way to cash in on an IP. And I have my cynical brain going, okay, I'm sure Broadway has suffered because of COVID. And this felt like it may be a financially motivated cash in to me. And I just wasn't super optimistic. And I'm happy to eat every single one of those words because the Wicked movie is a triumph from beginning to end. And just on Mark's point earlier about like the fact that people improve Broadway musicals, The Wicked movie, every minute of it feels like the culmination of 20 years of work. Like that, it doesn't feel like there's a second of screen time that hasn't been filled with effort and craftsmanship, and I loved it.
Wow.
They didn't just take time out for the bat dance. Sorry. One more dig at they didn't the original Batman movie.
I loved it too. Probably no surprise. I was sort of nervous going in because we really liked the stage musical so much, but it had been so long since I'd seen it. I was very worried about the fact that we were only seeing the first act. We were seeing the first part. And I thought, oh God, it's going to be 2 hours and 40 minutes of just the first act, which is basically the length of the entire show if you see it on Broadway. And I too was very pleasantly surprised. I thought both leads were excellent. I thought all of the supporting players were excellent. I think it got a little bit slow in the middle there, but that didn't really bother me. That last quarter of the movie was just, I thought, beautiful and glorious. And Cynthia Erivo is a national treasure, an international treasure. I just absolutely was blown away by her. And Ariana Grande, like I had no idea how funny she is and how this role really fit her sensibilities so perfectly.
Lawrence, you going to dissent? Pull out your movie critic.
I was incredibly underwhelmed by this film. I thought that it was way too long. I thought that it completely dragged in the middle, lost my attention. I thought that Cynthia Erivo was phenomenal. She was excellent. Her singing voice is amazing. She's a wonderful actress. I thought she completely blew Ariana Grande off the screen. Ariana Grande could not hold her own with that level of talent. Ariana Grande is a pop star and a former teen star, and Cynthia Erivo is a serious, legitimate actor, and she blew her off the screen. I found Ariana Grande's tics with her hair completely annoying. I did not like it. It may go back to the stage play. If it does, I would have found it annoying then, depending upon the actor. But I was completely underwhelmed, did not love the film. My kids liked it. My wife liked it. My in-laws liked it. Everyone around me was clapping. And I was sitting there like, what the hell are they watching? Because it's clearly not what I'm watching. So yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to dissent. Didn't love it at all. I was legitimately bored. I left in the middle of the film and got popcorn. That's how bored I was. Didn't like it.
Wow.
Yes.
What about you, Mark?
My first introduction to the musical was my daughter playing the songs in the car, not having the context and just hearing Kristen Chenoweth's Glinda doing a kind of annoying, it's the Kristen Chenoweth voice. And I like that Ariana Grande could capture that she had enough of that in her own performance. I will say the one place where they dragged out the original Kristen Chenoweth and the original Elphaba.
Idina Menzel. I'm trying not to say the name wrong
John Travolta did. Don't be a John Travolta.
Did,
yeah. Dragging them out for their cameo, I thought was a little gratuitous. Like it was fan service.
The singing was great. Didn't love
Really?
it. Yeah.
So I don't know if that song even that they were doing, I don't know if that section was in the stage musical or if that was just something added for the movie. I don't know. But yeah, in general, I like how cinematic it was. And I definitely have criticisms in using famous people. Like, can they really sing like that? Probably. I'm not talking about Ariana Grande. I'm talking about Jurassic Park guy.
Jeff Goldblum.
I mean, who doesn't want to see him do the wizard?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm very excited him in that part.
Yeah.
For sure. But like in his singing, it was so obviously pitch corrected. And pitch correction is much better now than it used to be. But when his voice jumps up to this like falsetto part, you are not doing that with your mouth. I don't believe this. And it was the same with Michelle Yeoh. I thought she was fine. She's always great. But I kind of thought that character there was another sort of teacher that was introducing them to the school who was just like just completely airheaded, malevolent presence. There's an equivalent character in Harry Potter, Umbridge.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought that's what Morrible was supposed to be, not what Michelle Yeoh did. She provides sort of too much gravitas and is not a singer, right? primarily. So it was the same kind of thing, but it didn't bother me in the way that it did in like the Les Mis musical or the Sweeney Todd musical. Like it was not just using Hollywood people to use Hollywood people. It was like, we're going to use these people, but we're not going to sacrifice at all. Frankly, I'm not that familiar with Ariana Grande's work as a pop star. I'm not young enough to even be able to name one of her songs off the top of my head. So this was basically my introduction to her. And I wouldn't have known that she wasn't somebody that was cast on the stage version.
I mean, she's a wonderful singer. Back up a little bit. So the Michelle Yeoh character, that Professor Madame Morrible, I believe her name was.
Yep.
I did not like that flip of the character. Like, there was not enough time because in the book you get more backstory, you understand what's going on. You like the flip of her character makes sense. It just felt like she turned on a dime. There was not any character development for me. And then another thing that bothered me was the young paraplegic sister. I don't know what's going on there. Like that character had nothing. Like the character was introduced and then she's there, but we don't get to know her very well. Like, what's going on with her? And then there's also the Peter Bailey character of Theo, I think his name was, right? The handsome, cool guy. What's going on with that guy? Like he is one way when you meet him. He begins to show a little bit of depth, but there's no real character development. Like, this felt like the first half of a completed story. It felt that way. It didn't feel like a complete story. You didn't get a complete arc. That like there was no real legitimate character arc for all these people. And I'm going to say that maybe with the second film, I'll think more highly of this film. But because I have a strong suspicion that certain people are going to turn into I know who's going to turn into this Tin Man and whatever. Like, I know that from the books, but I have a strong suspicion.
But that's not in the books. That's not, no. No,
I mean,
that does not happen in the book.
But you kind of get a feel for what's going to happen in the book, though. You kind of get a feel.
Sure. It is one of the things that I did not like
it's implied
about the stage musical, that every supporting character has to transform into something that supports the original Wizard of Oz story. It just seemed like such a neat little.
Yeah.
That is not.
It's not explicitly in the books. It's implied in the books. Like, if you know the story, you know what they're like, what he's going for. It's implied in the books. I didn't know that in the stage play they kind of did that neat thing, but I kind of felt what was happening. I don't know, guys. Like, I'm just not on the same cloud nine with you guys. I don't know. Maybe I have a dark heart. Maybe that's what's going on here.
If only Steve Martin were playing the wizard, then you would like it.
Let's go. I'd be down for it. I think he'd be great.
There seems to be a couple of places where you're running into problems with the movie, and the first seems to be just the musical adaptation, because you're coming from the book. So you clearly don't like a lot of things about the musical adaptation.
It's so loose. It's so not based on very much of the book. But yeah.
Yeah. And we should talk about that, and we should also talk about it as a piece of Wizard of Oz expanded universe material. But as an adaptation of the musical, first and foremost, and the musical is like the musical wears the big shoes that the movie has to fill. It seems like it's firing on all cylinders there. And like most of the stuff that you're complaining about, Lawrence, is I think stuff that gets resolved in the second act. The one thing that I'm kind of worried about is like, is there really enough plot to fill another movie of the same length left? And I'm worried that the second film is going to feel flabby and unnecessary because we've already had all the bits that I've heard of have already happened. But I'm prepared to give it a second chance. And obviously, as this movie, in the future history of this movie, will be people sitting down to watch the full 4-hour thing.
True.
Again, probably over Christmas.
True.
So I don't think the lopsidedness of the plot is necessarily going to drag it down.
Do you think that the fact that Mark and I have seen the stage version has sort of infected the way that we watch the film version? Because I can speak for myself. I went into this movie looking forward to, the big numbers, knowing, and just trying to figure out I can't wait for Defying Gravity, or I can't wait for Popular, I can't wait for these marks within the first act. And I was looking forward to it. Okay, well, let's see what they do. I know what I saw on stage. Let's see what John Chu's version is. Do you think that may have affected the fact that we enjoyed this version because we already kind of have a relationship with the material anyway? Or maybe not. I mean, Lawrence, you have a relationship with the material. It's just not the stage version. It's the novel version.
Yeah, just the songs being familiar or not. Is that a thing? Like, for me, I waited the perfect amount of time that I have not listened to the songs since many years ago. And so every single one, you know, of course I was anticipating Gravity, but was kind of a surprise. Like, oh, I remember that. That's a good moment. And I think the music is very well written. But yeah, what did you guys, as a first listen? Like, I always feel like with pop songs, you kind of don't get it until you listen to it 3 times. But that shouldn't be the case for musical theater. Musical theater is supposed to be immediate gratification. Here it is.
Yeah, it's engaging right away.
It's one of the reasons I try not to listen to musical soundtracks before I go and see the show, because I think it does. Musicals do have a job of getting the song it has to do its work for you the first time you hear it and in the context of the plot. And I enjoy figuring out whether a musical lives up to that or not. And for me, Wicked, the film was the first time I'd heard all but one of those songs, and I was blown away by all of them. They're real top tier Broadway tunes, almost without exception. The orchestration is brilliant. I didn't, because I'd only heard Defying Gravity, so I thought the whole soundtrack would be a lot more poppy than it is, because that one there's a big pop vibe. Actually, most of the orchestration reminded me of like Stephen Sondheim more than anything else. It was really clever and musically literate and really interesting to listen to.
Yeah, the opening tune, the darkness of that is just devastating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had not heard a single one of these songs before watching the film, and I can't fault the music. The music was wonderful. The music was well written. The orchestration was beautiful. The singing, I thought, now that is one thing I will give this film, that Cynthia Erivo, Ariana Grande are top-notch singers. In fact, I was so impressed with Ariana Grande's ability to sing all these registers. Like, I'm really impressed with her vocal talent. Her acting leaves much to be desired. Her singing is unbelievable. So I love the music. I thought the music was wonderful. And so I had no idea when the musical numbers were coming. I didn't know what was going to be happening. I just don't have that relationship with the music that you guys do. So I didn't know Defying Gravity was going to be here, or, you know, Popular, whatever, was going to be here. I had no idea. So I was pleasantly surprised with the music. I really, really enjoyed the music. It's just the acting that didn't work for me. But the music, I can't say anything bad about it. I thought the music was absolutely a beautiful collection of songs. I thought it was wonderful. I mean, my question is the second half going to be as good as this first half? Because this first half was really good musically. Is the second half as strong?
It's darker.
Yeah, I feel like all the songs that I'm looking forward to this song, were all in the first half. Other than, you know, the reprise of the intro and where they're going to actually take that, you know, when she dies, finally. I don't remember.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, sir.
Your problem, Lawrence, with the acting, is it the stylistic choices that you don't appreciate, or is it the delivery on those choices that you think falls short? Because there's a bunch of stuff in this film, the way the performances are laid out, that I could understand why you in particular wouldn't like, especially Ariana Grande's performance, which is so heightened and cartoonish. And that's clearly a choice that they're going for. I may be able to come with you as far as to say that I'm not sure Ariana Grande could perform any other role as well. But the choices that she made in this film, I think, were brilliant. And the director, I think, used her perfectly, because she has this kind of weird ethereal quality if you see her in interviews and on stage. And I think that just works all the way for this film.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that the direction was good. I think that, honestly, my real issue with this comes from the characterization, just the fact that it is just chopped in the middle and we don't get to see the rest of what's happening with the character. So that may be what's my main issue with that. But when it comes to Ariana Grande, I just don't think that she's able to hold the screen with Cynthia Erivo. When they're on screen together, Cynthia just has so much gravitas in how she embodies that character and how all the attention is there on her. And Ariana Grande is there and she's doing these quirky things, but she doesn't have enough gravitas, I think, to carry the things that she's doing. Now, for example, the Broadway actress, I've seen her, Chenoweth. She's from Oklahoma City, actually. She went to my college. I've seen her in many things. She has that gravitas. She can be weird and annoying, but she can center herself in such a way that the weird and annoying tics that she's kind of delivering is still centered in a strong performance. Ariana Grande, it's all tics. There's no centering there. There's no gravitas there, right? That's what I'm missing with that performance. And it's just really
Lawrence,
hard.
You're killing me.
It's just really hard for me. I'm sorry. Like, I'm trying. I mean, it's like Michael B. Jordan and Denzel Washington being on the screen together. Michael B. Jordan is handsome and he's good, but he is no Denzel Washington. And that's just what I'm seeing with these two characters, with these two actors, rather. That Ariana Grande is a pop star. She's a good pop star, and she's a good singer. But when it comes to the acting, she can't hold a candle to Cynthia Erivo. And Cynthia Erivo blows her off the screen.
Okay, so I agree that Cynthia Erivo is amazing. She has gravitas. She brings gravitas.
A rare actress. Yes.
She is. I think she's one away from an EGOT, right? Mm-hmm. She is also well rewarded for it. And she deserves all of the accolades she's getting for this. And she does bring a gravitas to this role, which originally that role was a little bit lighter, you know? But I think what John Chu has done with bringing both of these actors and singers together is created a chemistry. So even though Ariana Grande doesn't have the same gravitas that Cynthia Erivo does, she doesn't need it because they balance each other out. And that's what I liked seeing on screen. I thought their chemistry was spot on. And I think it was because there was some meat to this role. And Ariana Grande was just like light like whipped cream, you know? I love their chemistry.
Can I raise a related tangential issue? You know, the fact that the character is green, it's very natural, like, oh, let's have a woman of color play this part because it's about the otherness. You can sort of incorporate some sort of racial justice themes into this, you know, in a subtle way, but it added something weird, a weird dynamic that was not there in the original to the makeover scene of like, I'm the white savior who's going to fix your hair. Like, I noticed they were very aware of it and she didn't like actually touch the hair. That I just thought this added, like, this was an unintended side effect of what was otherwise a good idea.
I thought the choice to lean into that was the right one and was strong. And I didn't see the original, but it felt like having a black actor play Elphaba it's just really good and just sharper. There's a version of this movie, a version of this adaptation where they either don't cast a black woman because they think that it would be too complicated, or they cast a black woman and kind of ignore the fact that they've done that and just try and colorblind the take, which would have been stupid given the themes of the show. I think the fact that they lent into it was really smart and sharpened the critique that the story was offering without something. And this is what I love. I love this movie for this. They didn't ham it up. They made the point to exactly the right degree. They let the story make the criticism without lingering on it over much. In comparison with something like the Barbie movie, which we watched a couple of years ago, and one of the things I came away from this movie thinking was just with a lot of flattering comparisons in my head to the Barbie movie in terms of how this film works as a feminist story.
You know, just to hop on what you're saying, Al, which I think is a really good point, is one thing that having Wicked in a film version, you get these close-ups of their faces. And especially Cynthia Erivo's, there's so much work that's done in her face that she doesn't have to say out loud, we get it. We understand that she's feeling othered. And then seeing her relate to the teacher, the goat teacher. What was that goat's name?
Oh, Peter Dinklage.
Yeah,
yes.
I just thought Peter Dinklage. I never thought what
exactly
the character's name was.
So anyway, but we see that her recognizing herself in his situation, you know, and being able to get that close up without having to ham it up, as you say, or having to say things literally out loud. We understand because we get that beautiful close up of her face and we can see that register.
You know, commenting on one thing you guys said, I honestly thought that the subtle race critique of the film was really well done, honestly. I thought that was very well done. Having a black woman embody this green character and everyone being like repelled by the sight of her and having a black woman play that role, I thought was brilliant casting. I thought that was a wonderful choice. I thought that was very well realized and it said a lot without exposition, right? It said a lot about the interiority of that character without having to say, I feel bad because people look bad at me and I have this skin that's different than everyone else. I thought that was wonderful. I thought that was a wonderful realization. Guys, I wanted to like this film. I really did. And I like aspects of the film. I really do. Sarah, I just disagree with you so deeply. I just do. I wanted to like this more than I did.
It's okay.
So it sounds like you maybe think, though, that the treatment of the sister as a comparable, like, oh, she's in a wheelchair. And this is, they made a point to actually cast a disabled actor.
Right.
So she's not going to just get the shoes and then get up and run around or whatever. Like, yeah, that maybe that was not done. Certainly there was a lot that was like the sort of emotional dynamics that a 4-year-old is going to understand, that the father of the sisters is so mean to Elphaba and so dismissive, and the way that, the girl in a wheelchair can't get a date and we're going to hook her. Like, there was some very sort of grade school level stuff. It didn't bother me particularly, but it sounds like maybe what we're saying was the subtlety of the race thing was not preserved. Some of the other things were not so subtle.
It wasn't everywhere. Yes. I mean, like, so the girl in the wheelchair hooks up with the Munchkin, but the Munchkin is really more intrigued with, I don't know, guys. It just,
it's a Betty Veronica. It's a stupid teen thing, but these are the building blocks out of which some of these stories are made. But that's not in the original book at all. Like, there's none of this.
It's not.
None of this teen soap opera stuff.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. And that, like, he was interested in something completely different. He was doing political commentary. He wasn't interested in this kind of stuff. But certain parts of this film were so carefully thought out and were so wonderfully realized. And I loved it so much. And honestly, it centers around Cynthia Erivo. It's just so well done. And then there's other parts of it that are just ham-fisted. And I don't know if that is the play's fault. I don't know if that's the movie's fault. But it's just, it's an uneven product. It is really, really good in some parts. The music is wonderful. But when it comes to the actual film, it's so uneven.
Do you think that this is a problem of adapting something that was beloved on stage to film? Because there's so much work. Like, watching a stage production, your eyes just kind of go all over the stage and you're focusing on multiple stuff. And with John Chu's version, we're looking at it through his eyes. And I was just thinking about this because of the length of this movie. I was like, another over 2 hour movie, 2 hours and 40 minutes is a long time to sit for part one. And it's like, he really didn't veer from the stage version very much. I don't know what else he could have done to cut, because your eye does so much work when you're watching a stage production, whereas his eye has to do the work for us as the audience in a film version. I don't know. What did you guys think about that? That its success as a film from the stage?
I think that's a really good question, which segues neatly into the Wicked movie's relationship to the Wizard of Oz movie, because I had essentially the same thought. It just comes down to the fact that it takes an awful lot longer to communicate something visually on film than it does on stage. You've got to do establishing shots, and you've got to do pans, and you've got to have, and if you've got a bunch of people dancing, you have to show all of the different people dancing and then do the wide, and you can't just have them all traipse across the stage and run out the other side. Those seconds all add up. I can see arguing that it gets a little bit flabby in the second act, but all in all, given the amount of story that they have to work with, the amount of stuff that they have to get through, I thought the pacing was genuinely very impressive, but it just takes a long time to tell that much story on film. But the way that it chose to do that reminded me an awful lot of The Wizard of Oz, the cinematography in The Wizard of Oz, the kinds of big sweeping vistas that you see of Oz, and the delight in all of the colors, and the sets that they made were all beautiful as well. And I guess the playfulness that they have with the world building seemed like John Chu was very deliberately trying to make a Wizard of Oz movie expanded universe film, as well as an adaptation of the musical.
Man, there's so much to talk about in this whole, other adaptations and the Oz the Great and Powerful movie.
I forgot about that. I was just thinking about that. Yeah, I forgot about that movie.
I tried to watch that one. Got 25 minutes. And James Franco is just not it. And it broke my heart that was a Sam Raimi film.
Is that Sam Raimi?
Truly.
He directed that?
Yeah.
It is the most boring thing he's ever made, clearly.
It's so
I thought
boring.
it was fine when I saw it, but I didn't revisit it for this. What I really liked about Wicked, I really liked the direction and the scope. My daughter pointed out, they showed the deadly desert at the end of Oz, just as a little passing thing that they had. One interesting thing sort of that stood out to me, the dancers who had no arms. Do you know what I'm talking about? They were like little round guys.
Yes, the big rubber ball guys. That was great. Such a great visual.
Yeah.
So that is like a very Oz book sort of image. It's exactly the kind of weird creatures that John Neal, who illustrated most of the books, came up with. And I think they did it on the movie exactly like they did on stage. Like it was just guys in costumes with no arms. But given that how much they CGI'd everything else, they're not going to have a guy in a goat costume. They're going to just have a goat. I thought that was weird. Like if you're doing some unearthly creature, do it CG, don't just have a guy in a flabby shirt. I don't know, but I guess they felt like that was the dance we worked out for the musical. I don't know. That was one rare exception that I found. Like you didn't make the most out of it being a movie, even though I'm sure a lot of people who, shit on CGI would disagree with me and say, no, they did exactly the right thing.
That's interesting because I just read those guys as guys in weird costumes rather than creatures that look like that.
What makes you decide to choose the no arm shirt when you get up in the morning?
They have a dance to do.
Okay.
People in the Emerald City, like they have a clear schedule of song and dance routines that they have to tend to at various points during the day, which really gives the lie to the song in the original Wizard of Oz movie where they talk about how they don't do anything all day because they're all very clearly very busy people.
All right, we've hit about the 3/4 mark. I have to take us back to sort of the larger Oz world, and we can talk about these other adaptations and things because I did a little research, right? This is a public domain thing. It's been around. So anybody can write an Oz book now. There still is it's the Tolkien thing. It's his great grandson, L. Frank Baum, is still, one of the people holding the Oz torch and publishing Oz books and things, but anybody can do it. I mean, they refer to, it's not just the 14 books he wrote. They refer to the famous 40. That if you write anything in canon, it has to be in canon with the famous 40. Cause he turned over when he was dying, I guess, turned over to Ruth Plumley, I believe is her name. So she wrote more Oz books than he did. And then the illustrator took over. There was conflicts with the publisher. So she eventually got out of it. Like she'd even written some more books that didn't get published under the publisher. So John Neal, the illustrator, jumped in and did a couple, but it was similar. Pretty much the publisher drove into the ground. It might have been a consistent, steady franchise forever if there weren't some mistakes along the way. So it was, very much open to the author of Wicked here to clearly, there's a lot of stuff in the book that are drawn from the wider world, his references to the other lands, his bring in, let's have a little appearance of the person who will eventually turn into Ozma, things, that he's obviously aware, given that everybody's really focused on the Wizard of Oz, like as if it were a single book, a single thing. The rest of it, it's sort of just by probably you knew that there was a Jack Pumpkinhead character or maybe knew the TikTok man, that was some kind of familiar thing. He kind of made a mistake in that the second book that he wrote had no Dorothy in it. And the little kids did not like that. So he had to bring Dorothy back for all the subsequent books. And so any movie that has come out, like this Disney 1985 Return to Oz, which is like a terrifying, I don't know, had you guys seen that as a...
Oh, yeah.
Never seen that.
Yeah, I was scared by that as a child.
Yeah. So that combines elements of the second and third book just to get some of those characters back on the screen, because it's definitely that was sort of the whole thing. Like there is no real tension or plot. You were referring, Sarahlyn, to his lack of motivation for one. It's just for him to bring on lots of crazy characters and different weird parts of Oz that he can then have them joke around about. That's...
Yeah, it just seems like situations. We're going to go from one situation to the next.
So wait a minute. So Return to Oz, it scared you guys?
Oh, that movie is so freaky.
Really?
And it came out in 85, around the time that...
Well, Labyrinth is a similar movie.
Labyrinth, yes. So it had that kind of feel. It had and I think even the puppetry was done by Kermit the Frog. His son or something.
Okay.
I think there's a Henson in there. But anyway, it was not very good, but it's also extremely scary. I don't think I would have been able to see that as a little kid.
Al, you said it scared you?
It scared me as a child. I don't remember many details about the movie, except that I didn't like watching it as a child. And I think part of it was because I was very familiar with the Wizard of Oz, and it was this isn't this isn't my Dorothy.
They're not singing.
Not my Dorothy.
unnerving.
Not
She's about
my
to get
Dorothy.
electroshock therapy. That is that is because they think she's gone insane by talking about Oz all the time, which is nothing like that is in the books either. Like this was explicitly, I read the intro to the first book, L. Frank Baum writing in, like, this is a new kind of fairy story. Like, kids always need fairy stories, but the Brothers Grimm and stuff have all this dark stuff. And I want to just present the pleasant parts and leave that all out. But of course, Gregory Maguire being a chief violator of this, like, oh no, this is an existing thing.
He goes real dark.
So there's genocide and menage a trois and anything related to sex and violence that you could imagine is somewhere in the first book.
Yeah, it gets wild in that book, man.
To what extent is the book Wicked a response to the Oz books specifically as opposed to the movie specific? Because I always figured that it was basically about the movie. I'm sure it was literate about the wider Oz universe, but I always figured that what inspired it was specifically the role of the Wicked Witch of the West in movie history.
I think it's a mix. I think it's purposely ambiguous. Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, didn't Maguire, he said something about if you tell someone that they're wicked, they will end up fulfilling that role for you. So I think that was kind of part of what inspired him to go back and kind of revise this story for us.
So it's him reaching for, like, what is the most obvious villain in the canon that I can tell this story about. It seems like the movie is what you're reaching for in that case.
Oh, for Maguire? When you wrote the book?
Yeah, that's what we talked about for Maguire.
Yeah.
So did you end up diving into that, Sarah? I know you hadn't, and we were encouraging you to do so.
Encourage you to.
Yeah, I haven't finished it, but I've read maybe the first third or so. And I'm enjoying it. I'm going to finish it.
Yeah.
But I like that idea of going back and, revising who these characters are. And Margaret Hamilton, she played the greatest villain ever. And to be able to reframe that conversation around that character is, I think, pretty brilliant.
I mean, when I first read that book, I was not the sophisticated reader that Sarah is or the sophisticated thinker that Mark is. I was like high school, And so when I read the book, I just honestly thought this was a guy who wanted to take the Wizard of Oz and make an adult. That's just how it felt. I didn't sense any larger conversation happening with the film or any larger conversation happening with the mythos. It's just a guy who wanted to take the Wizard of Oz and make it edgy and kind of push the envelope. That's how it felt to me. I might need to revisit it, and maybe I'll see that. But that's just how I felt when I originally read that book.
But it is that idea of othering. I mean, it came out the book came out in 95, and I also think it was a response to the Gulf War at the time.
It might have been. That's right.
And
it
othering.
It might have been.
And then the musical came out in 2003, so that was after Twin Towers. And now the movie is coming out now, and we're talking about fascism all over again. But it's been updated for the time. But, we're always trying to other.
Yeah, othering is a thing we do.
To answer your original question, Sarah, yes, I think this was a response to the book rather than the movie. And the one thing I was looking for, which I just had to Google because I didn't notice it when I was listening to the audiobook of Wicked, are the silvers silver as they are in the book, or are they ruby as they were in the movie, just because they thought red would pop more on screen? And apparently they're silver throughout this. So that shows you that they're going with...
Yeah, he's going with the book. Yeah, he's going with the book.
He's going with the literary canon.
Was it a dream? That's the other big thing. Like,
yeah,
my daughter was actually just telling me, I don't like the Wizard of Oz movie because it's a dream, but it wasn't a dream. It was a real play.
No, that's a very fair criticism.
Just cheapens the whole thing. And you were there, and you.
Oh, Lord, here you go. One thing I will say, I'm really fascinated by the world, the larger world. I'm really fascinated by it. The animals, the magic, the fact that some people have magic, some people don't, some people want magic. What's the whiz all about? flying monkeys. I'm just fascinated by the world. I'm really interested in a larger world being brought to screen. Now, I know that Mark is probably going to say something about the original books and how there's 40 of them. There's a lot of world that's going on there.
Well, you tell me. You were brand new to this.
I was.
Like, when you're talking about, do you see the world building that Maguire is doing as at all connected to the world building that you read in these?
No, not really. Not really. No, I think Maguire, like, he's inspired by that world, but he doesn't really meaningfully interact with that world. I don't think. Maybe he does. Some of the rules, I think, of the original world is there in his book, but he just kind of goes in such a weird, like a strange direction. He just kind of takes it off. But I'm fascinated by the world that the film portrays, because there's all kinds of subtle rules in that world that I'm interested in, like the magic rules and, you know, why is it that she has magic and she's able to do it? Like, what's going on with her? Why is her skin green? Is there sins of the parents that's being visited upon her? I'm fascinated by that world. And I'm fascinated by the visual representation of that world. And again, I didn't read the later Maguire books, so maybe you're able to speak more on this, Mark, than I am. But in that original book, I just didn't get as deep of an explanation of what that world is like. But I'm very fascinated by the world. Like, that's one thing that really, really stands out to me, is that there's so much potential, because there are illusions, there's things you can do that parallels what's going on in this world. I'm fascinated by that world. I'm really interested in that world.
I just think it's very clear that Oz is in dire need of a constitutional convention, because the politics of that place are mess.
Without a doubt.
There's a royal family, but it's some kind of weird theocracy with the wizard at its head. And
Maguire adds religion back, which doesn't come through in the musical or the movie at all. But that the witch's father is like a preacher of the unnamed god. And there's like religious wars and things that are going on. It's really interesting.
Isn't that alluded to in the film? The unnamed god? Isn't that alluded? I think it's alluded to. Am I wrong, Sarah? I thought they mentioned something about God.
I don't remember.
They didn't? Okay, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm bringing my book knowledge to the film.
I think in the movie, they show the clock of the time dragon, right? In like the opening scene, right? Which ends up being a very important thing in the series of books.
In the book, yeah.
You know, it's interesting. So, right, when Baum initially, he puts out Wizard of Oz in 1900, and he was long dead by the time of the film, 1939, I believe. And I actually read the Ruth Plumley Thompson book that I started it. It's available as an audiobook, the Ozoplaning with the Wizard of Oz, where the wizard makes some planes and they fly around in the plane. So this was like something that was released at the same time as the movie, to kind of like as a tie-in, you know, to see what was going on back then. And it was sort of the same thing. Like, Wicked was supposed to be a one-off book, but then it got made into the musical. And he's like, what he said, I heard an interview with him as part of the audiobook, was little kids, which this book was not aimed at little kids, were asking him like, well, what happens to this character? What happens to this character? So he felt like, in light of the musical, now I'm going to write more books. But it's a totally different thing, because, you know, now it's in light of there is an audience and they have expectations, and I should do certain fan service to them in a way that there wasn't in the initial book. So it's an interesting dynamic. He does seem to want to fit his whole series. He calls it the Wicked Years, as if they're all before and through the first book, ending before the second book. So Ozma, the Lost Princess of Oz, is talked about as if it's Jesus, as if everybody in the land is waiting for this Ozma to come back, who is kidnapped and maybe is dead, or maybe is ensorcelled somewhere. But then he can, in his books, have like 30 years pass where Dorothy doesn't get any older. So I guess, you know, time moves different in the different dimensions or whatever. I'm still looking for a way to make this part of the same universe. That's the prime fantasy motivation, you know, this world building thing.
You wrote in the notes for the show, Oz as utopia. And I've been just kind of thinking about that a little bit. I wondered if anybody had thoughts. Did you consider Oz utopia? I did not.
Absolutely not.
Until you mentioned that. But then I was also thinking, you know, talk about world building. He creates a world where it is so inclusive. No one bats an eye, depending on your race or your sexuality or whether you're abled or disabled, unless you're an animal
or green.
Or you're green. Those are the two things that you will be scapegoated for. But I thought those are some utopian ideals. You want to have a world where everyone is included, and it seemed mostly inclusive, but obviously not totally inclusive.
I mean, but it's still, if you just happen to have, so let's say Mark has another child and the child turns out green, then it's not a utopia for that child. I mean, so no, it's not a utopia. And then, God forbid, you're born a gopher. Turns out terribly.
You could maybe make an argument that the original Wizard of Oz story, especially with the thing about the lost rightful princess, which I think is an interesting backdrop, because if Oz is a utopia, then it's always a flawed utopia because it all rests on the worship of the wizard, who we know is a fraud. Mm-hmm. So if Oz is a utopia, then it's a utopia that rests on a deception. There's probably some argument that you can make about a weirdly regressive politics underlying this whole thing, because if the story is someone's going to try and sell you a utopia and that person is always going to be a fraud, but what you really have to do is wait for the true and rightful aristocracy to take control and then all can be true and right with the world, then that's not a very progressive mythology.
No.
Yeah. Until jealous outsiders want your wealth and they come to try to conquer you. The Gnome King et al. Yes.
Yes. Oh. So the distressing level of realpolitik coming through in the expanded Oz universe.
Yeah.
The second book is really almost entirely about war and its challenges. So, it could be the Oz Wars, as in the Star Wars, that if you have any story in this universe, there's going to be some war involved. You can't have a Star Wars show that's just about people building monuments or something like that. Part of what made it a utopia, which is kind of made explicit in the later books, is nobody dies and nobody gets older. So what do you even do with that? He was trying to explain this to kids in a way that would make sense. Clearly the witch can die. Surely it's possible to die by accident, but nobody naturally dies. If you're really going to follow through I'm going to present a world that has none of the nasty stuff, then you falsify it. You make it, and you create these narrative puzzles for yourself that are insoluble. You can't, how do you have population growth if nobody dies, right? There've been whole dystopian Black Mirror sort of things written about this.
Didn't he solve that in a later book? Because I believe there's a plot in a later book where Dorothy and her family come to migrate to live in Oz, so maybe that's how they get their population growth. Kidnapping children from the real world.
Well, I think that's part of it. Aunt Em and Uncle Henry are getting old and they might die, so let's bring them to Oz so that then they can stay that way forever. And I saw that I was looking through, what have subsequent writers written. One of the writers wrote a story where, Uncle Henry and Aunt Em are choosing to die. They've had enough. And how do they cope with that? So I didn't see that story. I don't know if there's anything from the later stuff apart from Maguire that's actually any good at all. Apparently, because it's public domain, anybody can do anything. And it's not like major publishers are racing to pick the cream of the crop and put them out there. It's just sort of a bunch of fan fiction.
I'm sitting here and looking at this. I'm kind of taken aback, Mark. How many books Maguire has written in the Wicked universe? There's the 4 in the Wicked years.
So there's only the 4. I'm in the middle of the 4th one, which is sort of definitely the slowest of them, but maybe it'll eventually get good. But I really enjoyed the other 3. And then I guess then he wrote another trilogy or something with the granddaughter.
There's a Wicked sequel trilogy. And then there's also a Wicked prequel that just came out this year called Alfie, A Wicked Childhood. This dude has written 7 books.
Well, when you're onto a good thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good Lord. This year he published a book. That's crazy to me.
At this point, I still respect him as a thinker and a writer. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Did you agree? I characterized to you, Sarah, that he read like John Irving to me, just the poignancy and the vividness. But maybe that's an overstatement.
That is a high bar. That's a high bar.
That's a high bar. I know. John Irving's kind of one of my favorite authors of all time. He didn't strike me as Irving-esque, I would say. But I'm going to finish this first book for sure. I did enjoy it.
All right. Clearly, we could keep going on this for a long time. I'm sorry that I talked so much among us. But this is something I've been wanting to get off my chest. Maybe when part 2 comes out, we can revisit this.
I wouldn't mind that.
Who knows?
We have to revisit this. And I cannot stop with this being it. I need this to resolve itself. We will do another episode. Listeners, another one is coming in a year. I promise you. It will be here. If I'm still here kicking, it will be another episode.
I desperately wanted to shout out as a part of this episode a couple of musicals which have clearly been inspired by Wicked and done deconstructions of famous villains, the best of which is called Twisted, and it is available online, and it is the story of Jafar from Aladdin as reconfigured in a Wicked-like lens.
Interesting.
And it's my favorite kind of thing in that it is far better than it has any right to be as a kind of semi-professional musical production. And I love it to pieces. And yeah, it gets all my recommendations. And the fact that Wicked caused that to be able to be a thing is enough reason for me to love it.
Wonderful.
He also cited the Harry Potter thing as like, oh, now books for kids, publishers will allow you to put things that are a little more complicated. So the original Wicked book was just a novel for adults. He'd been writing novels for kids, and he's like, this is too confining. I want to write a novel for adults. But now the distinction doesn't exist so clearly anymore just because of the way the publishing world has moved. It's more permissive. Who knew?
Publishing.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hope you have a wonderful holiday season. We'll be back for our formal holiday episode soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.